I don't like the idea of Milhouse having 2 spaghetti meals in one day.
This video is brought to you by Surfshark VPN.
This is indeed a disturbing universe.
When I was younger, a favorite Halloween costume of mine was Homer Simpson, fulfilling every child's dream of becoming a fat, balding alcoholic. To me, The Simpsons was synonymous with the haunted holiday, and that's thanks to their annual Halloween special, Treehouse of Horror. Instead of being regular episodes set against the backdrop of the scary season, Treehouse of Horror is an anthology featuring 3 self-contained stories, one for each act. What makes it a special occasion is that none of the segments are canon with the rest of the series, so they can be science fiction, horror, parody, unfunny, anything is on the table. The tradition was inspired by EC Comics and began in Season 2, with an episode where Bart and Lisa told scary stories in their treehouse, hence the name. Every year since, there's been a sequel, putting the number of each entry just 1 digit below the season it belongs to. I'm not lying when I say that series like this and Star Wars helped teach me Roman numerals, which is ironically the Bart Simpson approved method.
So, Rocky 5 plus Rocky 2 equals Rocky 7, Adrian's Revenge!
Despite being a golden opportunity to break all the rules in a semi-conventional sitcom, it isn't a stretch to say that the Treehouse of Horror episodes aren't what they used to be. I used to think that they stopped being good at a certain point, but after rewatching all 31 episodes in chronological order, I believe that they've instead had their fair share of ups and downs, as The Simpsons itself has evolved over the course of 30 years. Let's begin by going back to the warning where it all began.
Hello, everyone. This episode is pretty spooky, so hide your kids.
Kids? Marge, do we have those?
It's interesting going back to the original Simpsons Halloween special because of how tame future episodes make it look in comparison. The difference comes from its use of slow pacing and heavy atmosphere to earn its scares, allowing the comedy to flow in and out of scenes pretty naturally. At this point, the show is 1 episode removed from its first side character spotlight, so the segments are focused solely on the family, fitting of the ghost stories that the wraparounds are based on. The first 2 play up their dysfunctionality, pitting the Simpsons against supernatural threats that reject their presence. The menacing aliens from Rigel 7, Kang, Kodos, and the sadly forgotten Sirach the Preparer are introduced in the second segment, and I like how the audience's expectations for them are played with, only for Kang and Kodos to be undeniably evil in their many, many more appearances. Their debut has a gorgeous use of shadows and striking color palettes that build both the comedy and intrigue. And this quality makes the final segment worth watching, while the vocal performances are also fantastic, and it must have been a highlight of the author's career to get a writing credit. This rendition of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven is played pretty straight. It doesn't quite feel like The Simpsons I'd come to know, but that's okay. This is only Season 2, and it showed that Treehouse of Horror could be an opportunity to experiment with not just the characters, but also the storytelling, establishing a solid baseline for what a great anthology from the series could be. Having a strong sense of self-awareness helped too.
Lisa, that wasn't scary, not even for a poem.
Well, it was written in 1845. Maybe people were easier to scare back then.
Like when you look at Friday the 13th Part 1. It's pretty tame by today's standards.
With the next year, we enter Season 3, the first of 2 with Al Jean and Mike Reiss as showrunners. The fast-paced humor and heavy amounts of parody carry over into their treehouses, creating the standard of having 2 of the 3 segments be parodies, one of which often targeted a classic Twilight Zone episode.
It's like something out of that Twilighty show about that zone.
While they maintained the wraparounds, the scope was widened to involve all of Springfield, which heightened the stakes even though the focus was still on the family.
Homer, did you barricade the door?
Why? Oh, the zombies. No.
Marge continued to warn viewers before each episode began, but their content had yet to reach the exhaustive level of violence that would become the norm. Like it's telling when the first character to die in any of these is Lenny.
Not Lenny!
Ow! Nice shot, Carl.
No! No!
Unlike the first year, semi-happy conclusions to these horror stories become more and more common. It's a practice that Treehouse of Horror 3 both embraces and mocks, but I tend to find it more satisfying than an ominous open ending, mostly when it's paired with a solid gag. You know, unlike this.
Oh, I hate having two heads.
Nowadays, the second TOH is remembered more for its memes, but I think both were entertaining improvements. The next 4 seasons would see new showrunners take the reins. David Merkin for 5 and 6, followed by Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein for 7 and 8. It's very odd to say this today, but these eras attempted to keep the show fresh, with more subversive humor or prominent meta and political commentary. These choices helped push the Treehouse of Horror episodes to new heights. We began to see side characters like Ned Flanders, Mr. Burns, and Groundskeeper Willie in antagonist roles, and the character expressions and camera angles were pushed in twisted and ambitious ways.
They're dogs! And they're playing poker!
After number 4, the wraparounds were retired, and the opening gags were soon to follow. In retrospect, I think this was the right call, as it made room for longer segments and gave the writers more flexibility with what the openings could be. There's some stories in this batch that aren't explicitly horror-themed, and jokes that could have been in any ordinary episode, like half the gags in Terror at 5.5 Feet. These entries are slowly drifting away from the dreary festive fright that Treehouse of Horror was conceived as. Despite that, they're widely considered to be some of the best by fans, and I think that speaks of how great the writing generally was during these years.
Lock your doors, bar your windows, because the next advertisement you see could destroy your house and eat your family.
We'll be right back.
Today's sponsor is Surfshark VPN, a virtual private network that switches your internet region and protects your online data. Yup, VPN was an acronym all along. Not only does it protect you from targeted ads and secures your connection on public Wi-Fi, but with the click of a button, you can see what other countries have on streaming services like Netflix. You can also watch region-blocked YouTube videos, like one of my old South Park reviews that I don't feel like re-uploading. It's the closest you'll get to traveling to another country for the foreseeable future. Use the code NICKtendo to get 83% off, along with 3 months free. Don't like it? Then get a free 30-day money-back guarantee. If that ain't enough, you can get Surfshark to encrypt your personal information and get alerts anytime your email address or password is compromised. Use it on your mobile device, smart TV, and gaming consoles. It's Surfshark VPN. Once again, go to surfshark.deal/NICKtendo and enter the code NICKtendo for 83% off and 3 free months of Surfshark VPN. Now let's conveniently talk about when an unsafe internet connection threatened to destroy humanity on The Simpsons. But first...
What do you want? We're here to eat your kids.
So Treehouse of Horror 8 is what I consider to be the end of my personal sweet spot for this sub-series, the run that I rewatch parts of every October. It was the second episode of Mike Scully's 4-year stint as showrunner, and my personal favorite of Season 9. It didn't break new ground, but it brought the focus back to the family, and had a sign of things to come. The cold open with the TV censor getting repeatedly stabbed marked a shift towards more gory and shocking comedy that would come and go over the following years. Starting with Numero Nueve, segments felt as if they were cut short or contained missed opportunities, like having Bart and Lisa enter the television world, but only travel through 2 shows. There were more topical parodies and prominent celebrity guest stars that had varying degrees of success. I like the variety of ways that technology revolts in the Y2K themed adventure, but I'm not into the lame jokes about censored swearing that come along when Jerry Springer briefly takes over.
I can't believe it. Jerry Springer didn't solve our conflict.
And now he's dead.
As the mediocrity slowly crept in, I still enjoyed watching Bart and Lisa fight Comic Book Guy, A Living House seduce Marge, and sentient dolphins take over Springfield. I really forgot how much I love Night of the Dolphin. The segment right before it has boring fairy tale takeoffs that don't entirely make sense, but this one runs with its outlandish premise and has so much great dramatic imagery. Even in some of the stuff I liked, I felt like there was even less emphasis put on the horror elements. That couldn't have been more clear in WizKids. Putting the author's political views aside, Harry Potter generally isn't very shocking. And if you're going to spend 7 minutes poking fun at the franchise, there should be more than vague references to characters and lore. I know this predated the first film adaptation, so the writers didn't want to alienate viewers, but there's more jokes about public school than there are about the source material. And sadly, it started a trend of somewhat pointless parodies. Season 14 marked Al Jean's first Treehouse while he called the shots on the show. and things started out decently strong. It took advantage of being animated with digital ink and paint by having dozens of Homer clones moving at once, which would have been impossible to do on cells. Even with a segment that's a little too heavy on story, the visuals and premises make this a solid episode. I also enjoy the designs of what the Springfieldians look like after the furries win, although I agree with Homer's assessment of the situation.
All you can do is eat and sleep and mate and roll around in your own filth and mate and eat. Where do I sign up?
The following years are mixed bags. Particularly, the Ned Zone does a great job building up suspense and building on jokes in only 7 minutes. Then there's Frankenstein, which perfectly casts Jerry Lewis as Professor Frank's father, but can't decide on if it wants to be a heartwarming family drama or a parody of the icon. That's another thing. Some segments took aim at generic fare, like Sherlock Holmes and Fantastic Voyage, the latter even daring to cap off its episode with a dance party ending. For the next 7 years, they do these dumb fourth wall breaking conclusions. Some weren't so bad, but they all began with a sad reminder that we were truly in a post-Shrek era. I've only seen bits and pieces of seasons 17 through 20, but I think this is my least favorite era of Treehouse of Horror. By this point, I had become desensitized to the excessive violence, too many stories relied on one-note jokes or instantly dated movie parodies, and worst of all, due to preempting playoff games, they weren't even Halloween specials anymore.
They're showing a Halloween episode in November!
Who's still thinking about Halloween? We've already got our Christmas decorations up.
I think the drop in quality that I noticed might have been caused by the Simpsons movie ramping up production around this time. If you look into its production, this film was a massive undertaking, constantly being rewritten as it was being animated. Unlike other cartoons that hit the silver screen, this was made separately from the show alongside new seasons. With Treehouse of Horrors requiring so many new and complex assets and having a very specific writing template, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the movie impacted how they turned out. What really disappointed me was how characters started to act in unfitting ways to move the plot along. Seeing Homer murder people left and right didn't only become less jaw-dropping when repeated, but it reminded me how much I missed how Marge was written in the early Treehouses.
These monsters are destroying everything and everyone we hold dear. And you kids should have jackets on.
Nothing she ever said went against how I expected Marge to act, even when she took the role of a witch. It's sad that the personalities of most characters shifted to be crueler throughout the show in order to better suit the comedy, but that doesn't mean all hope was lost for their portrayals.
I can't shoot her. She's Lisa's godmother.
You can apologize in hell!
I guess I could.
Treehouse of Horror 20 was the first to air in a 16:9 aspect ratio, making the visuals more detailed than ever. I felt like it was a well-rounded year with both creative and familiar ideas that worked because the characters were a little more grounded. Bart murders Lisa's teacher, Miss Hoover, but it's only because he misread the situation. I'm okay with his morals being slightly pushed because it's made clear that Bart is still a kid.
You don't say kill, you say prank. Like Mom and Dad say snuggle when what they really mean is let's lock the door and hug.
I think the best segments from this past decade deconstructed a character trait through a spine-tingling twist. Bart finally finds an education that suits him in hell, and Lisa accepts that she's going to have to turn 9 by repeating the day in a time loop.
Somebody kill me now.
Some of the parodies experimented visually, or were just plain fun, like their take on Back to the Future, where Bart enters a Season 2 flashback episode, and accidentally causes his mother to marry Artie Ziff, making him
Barty Ziff.
Oi, caramba!
Even though the bar is usually set higher than it was during those late teenage seasons, I was frequently frustrated at how many segments had great concepts that weren't taken anywhere interesting, constantly referenced media instead of mocking it, or couldn't decide between centering around the cast or commentary. The intros also started to take over more and more runtime. Just like the regular episodes, a few guest directors were brought on to do large-scale couch gags, such as Guillermo del Toro and A Bad Person. Having a 2 to 3 minute diversion was neat at first, but they persisted over time, becoming a virtual fourth segment. I'd be cool with this if the proper stories didn't feel like they were being cut short as a result, even if those were written first. Although there's been so much missed potential in recent years, at least the show is aware that it could do better.
It's gonna be Psycho with Skinner and his mom, Muppet Wizard of Oz, I'm Scarecrow Fozzie, and then one where furniture gets smart and takes over the world or something.
Sounds chillin'.
People love it.
Before I wrap things up, let's rank my top 5 best and worst Treehouse of Horror episodes, starting with the worst, because when it comes to inserting these overly long ranking segments into my videos, I have no self-control.
That's bad.
Number 5, Treehouse of Horror XVIII. The humor here is very one-note, or often unfitting for the characters. Each ending is worse than the last, and it's telling that I almost forgot to finish watching the third act.
The boredom is excruciating.
Number 4, Treehouse of Horror XVIII. I think the 2 of the 3 segments here are decent, even if one doesn't do its E.T. parody premise justice, and the other banks on nostalgia by bringing back Devil Ned Flanders. It's the parody of Mr. and Mrs. Smith with Homer and Marge that puts it on this list. Neither a scary nor a memorable film to focus a segment on.
Think of me on Pizza Fridays.
No.
Number 3, Treehouse of Horror XXVIII. You can feel how tired this one is just by listening to the voice actors slowly die.
Dad!
Some ideas are decent, but they're squandered by unfocused or uninteresting executions. I'm not a fan of the shock humor employed, but I'll admit that it is responsible for the most disturbing segment in years, where Homer grows a fondness towards eating himself. They were really building up to this one, weren't they? Number 2, Treehouse of Horror XVIII. Hope you're down for jokes about fat people, homeless people, and Jewish people. They even found a way to make an alien invasion story uninteresting. At least they got Dr. Phil to guest star. He's pretty scary. Number 1, Treehouse of Horror XXII. I wouldn't say I'm a fan of the parodies of Dexter with an overly gullible Ned Flanders, and Avatar where Bart has alien sex, but it's even harder to muster up a compliment for the takeoff on the diving bell and the butterfly, where Homer can only communicate through his farts. I may not have found it funny or horrific, but the episode did win an Annie Award for writing, so I guess it's objectively good. It even managed to score Funko Pop alongside the most terrifying character of them all, Gamer Bart. Now, on to my top 5.
That's good.
Number 5, Treehouse of Horror III. Apparently this had over 100 line changes weeks before it aired, so it's impressive that this turned out to be the point where these episodes got really, really good. Even when it aims to be cheesy or heartwarming, it never loses sight of being chaotic fun.
Funny.
Number 4, Treehouse of Horror VIII. This set of segments have a lot of setup and variety, but I feel like you get just enough out of each story. Dr. Hibbert is a surprising MVP, some visuals in the Genesis tub feel like a prototype to Futurama, and seeing Kang and Kodos hijack the presidential election only gets better every 4 years.
It makes no difference which one of us you vote for. Either way, your planet is doomed. Doomed!
Number 3, Treehouse of Horror VI. So many different characters, non-traditional horror concepts, and visual variety was packed in, most notably in the Homer Cube segment. The CGI was handled by Pacific Data Images, who would later become part of DreamWorks. Having primitive backgrounds with recycled assets allowed the characters to look and move accurately, and considering the limited budget and technology backing it, I think these segments hold up decently today.
I feel like I'm wasting a fortune just standing here.
Apparently, Homer Cube was featured in Cyberworld 3D, a currently lost IMAX anthology film that featured a selection of early computer animated short films and music videos. I hope a full version surfaces online someday, because it's Simpsons Lost Media, and therefore I care about it. Number 2, Treehouse of Horror IV. This year delivered creative, heart-pounding, and ridiculous escapades, surrounded by a great set of wraparounds. But I think its legacy lies in the introduction of Uter. He's quite the layered and complex character.
Don't make me run! I'm full of chocolate!
His first 2 appearances were in Treehouse episodes, so he could have easily become the next Kang and Kodos. Number 1, Treehouse of Horror V. Besides cutting out an amazing hand-drawn image of the Simpsons house made completely out of squirrels, this episode is practically flawless. It's constantly self-aware about its parodies, tongue-in-cheek about its obvious scenarios, and always unpredictable in ways that aren't random. Even the parody of One from a chorus line performed by the family after they're turned inside out is foreshadowed by a sound cue early on.
Dance until they make us stop.
The callbacks are able to create cohesion, bringing a sense of satisfaction to a near-perfect combination of horror and comedy. To my surprise, some of the most recent entries actually had a few jokes that carried over. The character animation also received a slightly more hand-drawn upgrade, which was sorely needed. Plus, this year they went back to their roots and premiered a Halloween special in November. Still, these showcases of Screams have started to blend together for me, though that's partially because I just watched them all within the span of 2 weeks. However, within the past few years, The Simpsons has made a great Halloween episode and a great horror anthology. They just aren't Treehouse of Horrors. I know there's been loads of other episodes with multiple stories, as well as a questionably canon, full-length Kang and Kodos adventure. But I want to highlight 2 recent hidden gems that kind of function as Treehouse spin-offs. Season 27's Halloween of Horror is a regular story that takes place during Halloween. Not only does it capture the atmosphere of the holiday, but also explores how the fear it creates can be harmful to someone as young as Lisa. I love how she faces a realistic problem that brings Homer's wacky antics down to her level. It is such a satisfying episode of television, and probably the best that so-called modern Simpsons has to offer.
Maybe I shouldn't admit this to my daughter, but I'm scared too. But you can't let fear shut down your brain, because between the 2 of us, we've only got one good one.
Season 31's Thanksgiving of Horror is simply a treehouse themed around Turkey Day. The parodies stand on their own, the Thanksgiving elements are naturally integrated, and the late Russi Taylor delivers her final performance as Martin Prince that sends off the character in a notable way. My favorite part is the credits that play creepy music over footage of a Bart Simpson parade balloon. It really completes the package. I think the secret to this episode's success is that it's the single longest in the series' history, clocking in at just under 25 minutes. The extra breathing room it provided was very effective, and it makes me hope that they'll someday do a double-length anthology. I think it's possible, because Treehouse of Horror has always been the place for taking risks. It's the reason why I always go out of my way to watch it, even after all these years. Plus, you're always guaranteed a fantastic-looking poster, amusing Halloween names that Twitter users have subconsciously ripped off, and a visit from our dear friends Kang and Kodos. Now that there's exactly 31 iterations, you have one to watch for every day of October, which makes these feel like their own little mini-series. I wonder what your impression of the show would be from only watching these episodes. I'd like to know how they've been viewed in countries that don't even celebrate Halloween, or just what you think about this tradition, cause this is all just my opinion. Even though dark and shocking comedy has become more and more common on The Simpsons, there's always going to be a place for tales that will shatter your spine and boil your blood. And maybe even a dance party or 2.
Can I go now?